Today I'm here in St. Pete Beach with Annie Fleeting and Danielle Landreth of NextHome Beach Time Realty, and we're here to discuss realtors and their role in 1031 exchanges. So Annie, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in real estate.
Well, I'm Annie Speeding, and I'm the broker owner at NextHome Beach Time Realty. And I kind of got stuck in real estate as a default. Was a property developer, and all of a sudden the market collapsed. But I still had a fondness for eating and having a roof over my head. So I started my own real estate company doing vacation rentals, and then became a brokerage. And here I am, 21 years later? Wow. Yeah, and still hard at it.
21 years later, I guess that's a real long time in real estate, is it?
It feels like 51, but
Yeah. Oh, awesome. No, and then Danielle, how did you tell us a little bit about how you got started in real estate, a little bit about yourself, maybe how you kind of, you and Annie met. So yeah.
certainly. So I'm Danielle Landreth. I am the managing director and broker associate for NextHome Beach Time Realty. I have really been in real estate my whole life. Even as a child, my family owned investment properties and rentals. So at a very young age, I kind of got that bug. I can remember going to the grocery store with my mother, and when you would check out, there'd be the little cart there that had the old homes magazines where you could flip through and see the pictures. And I was obsessed with that from a very young age. So fast forward a few decades, and my husband and I relocated to Florida from the Midwest, and I met Annie soon after. Changed my life. Brilliant lady, so I'm incredibly thankful. Started out with her managing vacation rentals, and it's just kind of bloomed and blossomed from there.
Awesome. No, thank you. Again, thank you for taking the time to discuss this here. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about, you had family investing in real estate. So obviously that kind of segues into our discussion here about 1031 exchanges. So tell me a little bit about what you as a realtor know about 1031 exchanges in that.
So 1031 exchanges are a very important program for investors, or can be, depending on what their ultimate goals are. It is an opportunity and a way for them to keep more of the profit if they decide they want to sell a property, which in turn gives them a little bit more buying power.
Right.
That is right for them. It's really important that they identify that early on because, just like most things that are great to use, there are deadlines and timelines and certain things that have to be done in a particular order, and which is so important that they work with an agent who is well versed in 1031s
Right.
exchanges and has that qualified intermediary.
Yeah, and that's something we always talk about when we're working with realtors in that regard. They don't have to be the experts in it. It's the opportunity to understand that opportunity is there and exists for them and for their client. And one of the things we always talk about is when to start that 1031. To understand because of those timelines and those processes that are all involved. And we've always working with realtors say start that process early enough. Understand what the timelines are going to be, because that's not only going to help you as a realtor because their time frame that they have to start identifying or start looking for properties or even to close under from that. And that all plays a huge role in the 1031 process, but it allows that relationship to flow a lot more, knowing that this process can keep flowing, allowing them to go from one way to the other there. So in your experience, do you have a lot of clients, investors who know about the 1031, or is it something that you're kind of starting to bring up to them and say, hey, what's your long-term goal here? When you sell this property, what do you want to do after? Is there a goal to move to another property? What are you trying to do? So how's that kind of come play for you?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag. For me, the clear signs are the property that they're talking about selling
Mhm.
isn't their primary residence. I mean, that's like ding, ding, ding.
Right.
So if it's not their primary residence, and I know that it's been an income generating property, whether that's a vacation rental or a second home that they rented out, part of the time, land, something,
Right.
along those lines, for me, that's the first indication that, hey, they may be a good candidate for a 1031. And the second big aha moment, if you will, is if I know that they are also planning to buy another property after the sale of that one.
Right. And that's what comes into play because they figure, a lot of real estate transactions are, let me sell something, then I'll just go buy something else, not realizing there's certain requirements, at least from the 1031 perspective, that have to be in play that truly then benefits them more. They're still selling something and purchasing something else, but with some of those other restrictions that come into play that can help them. And again, like you mentioned, allow them to have that extra cash that normally would be set aside for a sale, for taxes, now become more involved with them to be able to use towards their replacement property in
And
that.
it can be really significant
Right.
and make a difference whether they get a property directly on the beach or across the street from the beach.
Right.
Whether they get a 2-bedroom condo or a 3-bedroom condo. So it's a really important conversation to have. And as realtors, we have to be well versed in these sorts of programs and at least be the source of the source.
And I think from that property management standpoint, that's a perfect place to start for people. You know ahead of time, hey, people are either selling or what's going on, or people have, I'm sure, come to you and say, hey, if this comes available in this location or in this building, let me know. I might be looking, right? I mean, is that kind of how that comes?
Absolutely. I think one of the other things that we want to say straight up front too is that when those individuals come to us, it's important that as realtors that we stay in our lane. So yes, you don't know what you don't know. We don't really know what they don't know, but we know what our license covers and what it doesn't. So the minute that opportunity was identified, we put them in touch with someone with the expertise and the license and the
Right.
insurance and everything else in order to make sure that that transaction goes smoothly and that their objectives are obtained.
Yeah, and that's what we always pride ourselves, working with realtors, is say, like, only know enough to be dangerous, right? Enough to identify the opportunity. But hey, let me put you in touch with Ryan over here at US 1031. He's a qualified me. He can talk to you about the 1031 exchange, the rules, the requirements, the nuances that come through with that. We have a great relationship to be able to then discuss how's that kind of play into their bigger picture, the role, what they're going to do, the timing. That's a big thing with everybody, timing. But that's one thing we always pride ourselves is we're just no different than a lender in your toolbox,
Right.
a home inspector, a roofer that you can just refer. You're going to be able to refer and get that quality of service, from them, in that regard, with that. So that's one of the big things we always pride, or push, with realtors is, look, just identify the opportunity. We can take it from there, work with you, work with your client in that regard on that. So
one of the things that's
yeah.
important is that, for example, how I wound up meeting you.
Right. Yeah.
And it was kind of difficult circumstances for us. I was abroad. I had a family member, a brother that was passing, and I had had an office on the market for a long time. And all of a sudden, of course, that's when those sort of things happen. And I've always wondered, how could somebody forget about their timeline? Well, I discovered that, even seasoned veterans can wind up having circumstances that, impede their mental capacity. So I was fortunate enough that my title agency company introduced me to you, and you came to our rescue. We got everything done in a timely manner. And so now here we sit, and I certainly with a better appreciation at how things can run away. And mind you, it would have never happened to a client. Of course not. Of course not. I would have handed it over to you the minute that I was leaving town. So,
Well, you can see, yeah, that's one of the big things is the time frames that come into play. That 45-minute, or I'm sorry, not the 45-day identification period comes pretty quick, and that's why we always say start early. That's a process, but then even then working with realtors, hey, here's their 45 days, so you really know you're under the gun a little bit, but you're not. But that comes pretty quick in that regard, and then to be able to close in that 180 days. So I'm glad we were able to kind of help you out with that in that regard. So I guess from a realtor standpoint, in your experience as well, how's 1031 exchanges or knowing about 1031 exchanges help differentiate you in a realtor market where you guys are always competing for each other, for business, right? Realtors are, it's a pretty competitive, industry.
It can be. I think it's like most things in life, knowledge is power. And when you are working with a realtor who is well versed in possibilities and who has a big network of trusted vendors that they can put you in contact with, then you are much, much better looked after. I always tell my agents, we're not the source, but we can be the source of the source. Wouldn't be any different than having a trusted lender or a trusted home inspector, like you mentioned. So I think working with somebody who is well versed in 1031s and even know that it's an option. I unfortunately I have met some that don't even fully grasp that. And there, because of the deadlines, it's so important to have somebody who can do that.
Plus, I think it kind of shows from a differentiate, you're more invested to them and their bigger picture as a whole, right? It's not just more of this transactional type transaction. Let me sell your property and let me go buy another property. And you become more involved in their overall
Right. Our whole
picture.
business model is
Right.
based upon it being more than just transactional because the majority of people that come to us know that we're short-term rental specialists, although we also have a portfolio of long-term rentals. So, predominantly, not always, we do plenty of people that are going to homestead and they're going to stay there, but predominantly we're dealing with a lot of investors and folks that are maybe coming from a different area. They don't know the rules and regulations that are here, and it's important that they're paired with someone that does.
Right.
Right.
You know,
It's easy to make a big mistake, a costly one.
Absolutely. As we see regulations changing in certain areas within the county or within the city limits and so forth, having that realtor that's very versed in those type of local regulations of what's going on, especially coming from someone, the perfect thing with the 1031 is, a lot of people don't realize, oh, if I'm selling in California, I have to stay in California. It's a huge misconception is that, you can sell in California and buy here in Florida, and hopefully then they're understanding some of those regulations and rules that come into play. But from the 1031 allows them to be able to go and make their portfolio, diversify their portfolio geographically, from that end, as well as long asset classes, right? I'm sure you have a lot of clients, oh, it's a condo for a condo. And that's truly not the case. It's, hey, I want to get out of this condo and do you have anything single family home wise that I can rent out? And I think you guys see some of that as well,
We see
correct?
that a lot.
Right. Awesome and everything. So I guess, being in the industry so long, I guess which considered long years, what kind of advice would you have for new agents that come through, especially even from a 1031 perspective? How would you what would you advise new agents coming into the industry?
I would give the same advice that I give the agents that are in our office, and that is education. You need to learn about this product. You need to team up with a qualified intermediary that is going to give your clients fantastic service and keep them on track with all of their deadlines. Um, Again, as I said, be the source of the source. We need to stay in our lane. We're not tax experts, so we're not going to give that direct advice. But a little bit of knowledge is power. And the most important thing is, again, having somebody that you can refer them to whenever you get the slightest hint that this could be a product that could be beneficial to them.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's always, for our end, it's always educating, right? I think that's what we're always learning in the market here is always educating even then the type of exchanges that they come out depending on how the market conditions are, right? If it's a buyer's market or seller's market, how does that 1031 get structured? Do they have funds to be able to buy first because it truly is a seller's market and there's competing they're competing for their purchases there, from that end. That's, how we structure 1031s kind of helps out from that, and as we get going through here, is any good examples of how 1031 has helped a client out that you want to share, any kind of stories, from that
We
end?
were talking about that before, weren't we?
Yes.
Because obviously, I've been in the business a very long time. She's not old enough to have been in it that many years, right? But um, it, it's important when somebody comes to you that, first of all, we work on a team.
Right.
Okay. So it doesn't matter. Some of them, they're not seasoned in doing the vacation rental business or about 1031 exchanges. There's always somebody that's there that can help them. Right. So Danielle and I can jump in. At this stage of the game, I think everybody in our office is very well aware and has done several 1031
Right.
exchanges because we do short-term rentals. So, if people like to be with somebody that's going to be engaged with them from beginning to end. it's important from the get-go because we have, for example, people that'll call us and say, it happened just the other day, I've got these properties I'm going to look at. They're fabulous and they're in Bel Air Beach and I just love it. And I want to buy it, do a short-term rental. I said, well, you're not going to be able to do them in Bel Air Beach. What do you mean? They don't allow it. But it says it on the MLS. I don't care. It's not what it says in the municipality, right? So it's important to know what you know and to stay in your lane. And we always have to talk to their accountant. They talk to the qualified intermediary. We help them pick out the properties that we think will do the best. And we have the expertise to know how we're
A
going
good return, right? What properties going to give them the return that they're looking for?
That's what we're comfortable with.
Right.
Correct.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate the time of you sitting down and discussing it, with us today and how it's helped you, you both, your business and you both as realtors. So I appreciate the time of sitting down and sharing your stories with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity to do so.
Thank you.